Welcome back to the Anchored Podcast, the official podcast of the Classic Learning Test. My name is Soren Schwab, VP of Partnerships here at CLT, and today we're joined by Brad Buckley. State Representative Brad Buckley is currently serving his third term in the Texas House of Representatives and represents House District 54, which includes half of Bell County in Central Texas. He was first elected to the Texas House in November of 2018, and was the Texas House Republican Caucus's Freshman of the Year in the 86th legislature. He is the chairman of the House Public Education Committee and is honored to lead on important policy that affects professional educators, the 5.5 million school children in Texas and their families. A native Texan, Buckley was born and raised in rural Bell County and is a product of Killeen ISD schools. He is a proud Texas Aggie and received his bachelor's degree in 1989 and his doctorate of veterinary medicine in 93. After graduating, he returned to his hometown of Killeen to open his veterinary practice and has been serving his community and their pets since 1994. He has also served on the school board for the Killeen Independent School District. He's the proud husband of Dr. Susan Buckley, who is a career educator and currently serves as assistant superintendent for secondary schools in the Killeen Independent School District. He's a proud father of Emily, Aaron, and Bo, all of whom are also Aggies. The Buckleys are also grandparents of Leo and Cole. Representative Buckley and Susan live on their ranch in Salado, where they maintain a cow-calf operation and raise and train Western performance horses. And we are so honored to have Representative Buckley on the podcast today. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Soren. Appreciate the invitation to be here.
Absolutely. I know it's a busy time, so we're really grateful that you're making time for us here. We always start the Anchored Podcast by talking about our guest's own educational journey. So tell us a little bit about your own K-12 education.
Well, born and raised in Killeen. It was a small town, a military town, right adjacent to when I was born, it was called Fort Hood, now Fort Cavazos. And I'm the grandson of my granddad was the head football coach and a teacher and a principal, math teacher, principal, administrator, but basically head football coach, athletic director. And my grandmother taught first grade for 42 years. My dad did not go into education, but he ranched and then worked on Fort Hood as an accountant. And my mom was a first grade teacher and an early childhood educator for 38 years. So I attended public schools in Killeen, graduated in high school in 1985, and then went on to Texas A&M University, where I pursued my degree to become a veterinarian, and ended up back home, and been there ever since.
Fascinating. You're a veterinarian, an entrepreneur, and of course you're a father. How has all that kind of shaped your view on education?
Oh, my wife, she started out in the business world. She worked in the business world, put me through vet school. And then when we got back home, she always said, I'll never be a teacher. And then had the opportunity to teach business or actual marketing at a local high school, actually the high school where she and I graduated from, and really fell in love with education, and then went on and received a master's and a doctorate, and had worked there in the schools, been a curriculum director, assistant principal, a high school principal, elementary principal, and now, of course, assistant superintendent. And then we raised our three kids that way, and they all attended public schools in Killeen, and we three kids that all were college ready, all graduated from Texas A&M, are now out in the workforce. One child with an advanced degree, and so we're pretty fortunate. But we were the type of parents that were very engaged, and we were always going to do what was necessary so that our kids got what they needed. And we felt like our kids received a great education. My youngest is 24, so it's been several years ago. But both of us have always believed, my wife and I, that really education is a unique process, and one size does not fit all, and that the most important thing is to understand that our kids need to be educated. They must be prepared to launch, and whatever that means, whether it's higher ed, whether it's a military career, or whether it's in a career of some kind or a trade. And so that's kind of what we focused as a school board member in Killeen, I focused a lot on that. I was there when we founded the first career school, or career high school, to bring those career jobs or prepare kids for jobs and careers. And then my wife, of course, has led the charge on lots of different types of curriculum and things in our local public school system.
Yeah. At CLT, we have worked extensively with leaders in the classical education world, kind of the renewal of the liberal arts education, and it has primarily thrived within private K-12 schools and colleges.
Yeah.
But we've also seen public charter schools in particular across the country adopting classical models, and especially so in Texas. When you think of the growth of Texas public charter schools like our friends at Founders or at Valor, it seems to indicate that this option is very attractive to many parents. What's kind of your assessment of why so many Texas families are seeking this kind of more traditional classical education?
I think it's sort of a return to our founding principles. It's a return. It's an overused term in education, but back to the basics. I feel like
no, you're right.
that over time, any profession wants to advance, and often the innovation that occurs sometimes begins to sort of outpace what we did in the past and been prescribed as being better. And even in medicine, in veterinary medicine, sometimes we sit down and look back and go, what we did before was actually better. And I think COVID, at least from the parents that I talked to, COVID pulled the curtain back on some of the instruction in our classrooms. I think in Texas that overall the vast majority of things that go on in Texas classrooms is entirely appropriate. I was in two classrooms yesterday, and I saw wonderful teachers in front of kids where learning was taking place, and it was high quality materials, students on task. There was a student discourse between them talking about it. Was rigorous, it was challenging, and it was fundamental. But I think during COVID, parents saw some things that quite frankly, they didn't understand. And when that happens, a parent says, wait a minute. And so then they began to seek other options. And I think the classical learning model is one that parents sought out because I think they understood it. But I think also they understand that model, for many parents, it really matches their values, and it matches the future that they want to prepare their kids for.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about back to basics, because I mean, so much of kind of the conversation about education and classical education, progressive education, like we're not really talking about what's actually like curriculum wise, what's happening in the classroom. Oftentimes, like philosophically, there are philosophical differences. But when you talk about back to basics, I assume you're referring to the way we teach math and getting our kids to be able to read books. And so is that something that you're seeing there that now some of the public schools potentially are adopting too, where they're saying, we tried some things and maybe they didn't quite work as well? I know that a lot of schools now kind of go back to teaching phonics. They might call it now the science of reading, right? But we kind of drifted away from it. Now we're coming back. Is that what you're seeing?
Absolutely. In Texas, I believe in 2019, maybe it was 17, don't quote me on that, but we instituted the reading academies for all of our teachers that were involved in the early childhood and the elementary reading space, so that they could, we could take what we know about the science of reading and really implement it in our schools. But the reality is that the curriculum needs to match that. If you're trained in the science of reading and then the curriculum doesn't match that, the curriculum still relies on 3Qing, if it relies on a whole language balanced literacy approach, and really, is not built upon a structured literacy framework, well, then you're really talking two different things. You're basically teaching best practices and the best evidence-based methods via the science or the reading academies or the science of reading, but then you're not providing teachers with the tools to actually implement the science of reading. And so we worked very hard in the legislature this last session to pass a bill that will put high quality instructional materials in the hands of Texas teachers, one that understands, the curriculum understands that we need to teach the science of reading, that we need to have kids of all ages read passages. There's lots of read alouds in there. We also know that often listening listening to passages that are above grade level actually helps kids read on grade level. That's the way the ear hears it, can build the vocabulary. We have vocabulary lists. There are things, it's kind of become where reading was presented far too long as this wonderful thing that a child would just do out of enjoyment. That they would grab a book and they'd curl up in the window and they would disappear off into whatever the book is about. And I think for some kids that's the case. We all, I've, 3 kids and you have the one that's the bookworm that, is just voracious reader and can read really anything, and reading came easy. And then in some instances it's not. But we do know that there are ways to present material to the brain so that children really learn to read. And in any instance, they must be proficient in reading by grade 3, where it really begins to cause an issue. And it is the beginning of a real academic struggle for too many kids.
Yeah. And you already touched a little bit on that, but in Texas, I mean, you have begun to really hone in on, what is going on in the public school classrooms. And I think our listeners would really benefit from that, and talk about some recent reforms you have led on addressing state academic standards, instructional materials, testing, and so forth. So maybe I want to ask you kind of on instructional materials. One of the bills that you authored was recently enacted, House Bill 1605. What problem did Texas face there, and how is that bill solving it or trying to solve it?
Well, what really was the impetus of it, when we looked across Texas and we looked at studies, we found that only about 19% of the lessons being taught in Texas public school classrooms were being taught on grade level.
Good.
Okay, so now it's not a grand cabal where everybody came together and said, let's teach below grade level. But the reality is that you have kids, that come into a classroom that are at various levels along. They're at various levels along their academic journey. Some are advanced, some are in the middle, some are behind. And so teachers were having to scramble to be able to make certain that they could loop back to make sure those kids that were behind, that they could bring them along, okay, to try to catch them up. But in the meantime, those in the middle and sometimes those that were already advanced weren't growing at the level we needed them to. And it was really stifling. And so House Bill 1605 really sought to remedy that by providing rigorous materials. Again, the science of reading is embedded in those materials, but also kind of a return to the classics where passages from great works of literature are included. There's theologic and biblical references to materials that really are the underpinnings of some of the founding principles of the country, and even understanding of world history, and really kind of a grand recognition that true reading comprehension and the gaining of knowledge and learning is built upon sort of understanding some founding fundamental things about this world. And so that is really what we've created in what's called Bluebonnet Learning, which will be a state-owned resource that districts can access. But then again, we've also set the standards where other producers of curriculum can have their materials vetted to receive that high-quality instructional material designation. And so we really have provided material that raises the bar in the classroom, that is more rigorous, that is better for teachers. They don't have to spend extra time going outside on the weekends, going out on the internet, finding things on Pinterest and Googling things to plug in the gaps. We also are extremely intentional about this curriculum covering the standards that our state board says kids need to know. And those standards are really a reflection of parents and community members and classroom teachers, the business community, of what we think children ought to know when they leave our system. And so this is built to build a menu of curriculum that our districts can use. The Bluebonnet materials, the Bluebonnet learning materials, though, I wouldn't call it a true classical learning curriculum, but it's very much based in that. And I think it also gives our public schools a great tool,
Right.
to say, here's what my communities are wanting. Let's take a look at this and really kind of see if we can match the values of our community.
Oh, I love everything you just said. I mean, it really, and I think sometimes the misperception maybe with classical or classic or whatever it's called, right? Like, especially in the lower grades, we want kids to be able to read and fall in love with reading. And what better way to do that than reading great stories, right? Classic
Yes.
literature and Aesop's fables and The Wind, the Willows and The Prince and the Pauper.
Yes.
Those are all
Yes.
stories that you talk about, like for some kids, reading is a chore. Well, for young kids, oftentimes reading informational texts about, I don't know, newspaper clippings, like that is kind of boring to them. But
Yeah.
great stories and fables. I mean, you have three kids of your own, right? Like
Mhm.
everyone
Absolutely.
loves a great story, but they're usually also rich in vocabulary, right? And
Yeah.
so
True.
oftentimes, that obviously impacts their
Well,
reading. So um,
yeah.
classical, potato, right? You're just saying
Yeah.
let's read some good stuff and kind of raise the bar a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and knowledge, is the basis of comprehension.
Yeah.
That's the thing. You don't comprehend if you don't have the knowledge base. And for my kids, we could take them places on trips and see historic sites and see the wonders of the world, if you will. Too many kids come to Texas classrooms and they may not have been outside the city they live in. And so
Sure.
you can begin to talk about, different, historical sites or places or interesting features around the country or the world. And it's hard for them to make that connection to really build that knowledge base to have great comprehension. And so when if you can't take them there, they can read about it. You know what I mean? And they begin to learn that, and they either read it on grade level or they can hear it in a read aloud as they build their own reading skills to match that level. Because we know the science of reading really does that. And so, I think it's a great step. And the other thing about the materials we created is we have a parent portal that's there. And it's not only for parents to feel comfortable with the content, but it's a way for a parent to look in and say, how can I help? Because we need, regardless of the setting, we need parents as partners. The
Sure.
education day shouldn't end when the school bell rings. When homework is there and there's materials to be covered at night or exams to be prepared for, a parent really needs to be able to look in the window, if you will, to see how the material is being taught, what material it is, and then be able to assist their children in learning. And that when you have all that working together, you see great student achievement, and
Yeah.
that's kind of what we're seeking.
Yeah. Well, and I really kudos to you all and to the state of Texas. I think sometimes maybe the public perception is that we're just kind of dumbing down everything, right? And
Yeah,
and maybe for a little while you talked about systems and
sure.
structures, right? Large organizations. Maybe there was a little bit of that. And I can also understand throughout COVID, it was challenging. And you had students that weren't able to go to school as often or not at all. They spoke Spanish at home. They didn't hear, right? And so
Right.
to hold them to the same standard throughout COVID, that's a difficult position to be in, right? But at the same time, realizing, I mean, I guess with your three kids, right? They didn't always want the celery or the carrots, right? But you know it's good
Right.
for them, right? And so I think
Really.
some of progressive education, unfortunately, has also become all about, well, whatever the student wants. And don't get me wrong, we want the students to be excited about things, but we also need to trust, obviously, our parents and our teachers that they, when it comes to that, knows what's best
Well,
for the students as it comes to their literacy.
yeah, absolutely. And how do we know a kid doesn't like it if they never experience it?
Hmm.
And I think we drifted too far away to say that well, these are digital natives. These kids are entertained constantly. That everything needs to be the kinetic. It needs to be very kinetic and the subject matter must be contemporary. That is we are short selling, or I should say, I'm not a stockbroker, but that is so short sighted, if you
Yeah.
will. Sort of a short-sighted expectation. And then we do know that when kids are exposed to the classics, it kind of opens new doors, and it is a foundation of knowledge that they can build upon. And they're classics because they're classics. They've stood the test of time. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? We've kind of gotten into what I call the edutainment world a little bit, and all in the name of student engagement. And I do think that some of the reading struggles our kids have had, possibly because whole language has really been proven to not be the science of reading. 3 cueing, where, you're covering up a picture and covering up a word and have a kid look at a picture and try to guess. I mean, it just doesn't fit with the science of reading. And so if you don't have, if you're intimidated by the material because you can't read well, of course you're not going to embrace it.
Right.
And so I think all of those things are connected, so you can sort of see the way the pathway, where the pathway goes. And we've just tried to change that pathway in Texas. And hopefully we're going to get there. Feels like we are.
Well, we're cheering for you all. I think
Good.
too. And I'm a former English teacher. I was in a charter school, and I think sometimes too we when we're not teaching certain books because we think it's just too challenging for the students or it's just too hard. I always thought that was more in reflection on our ability to teach it well, not the students' abilities, right? Because they are capable of so much more. I talked to one of my colleagues yesterday, and he was at a public high school, and he said that their teacher thought that Jane Austen, like reading Pride and Prejudice, would be too challenging, so they read Pride and Prejudice and Zombies as their curriculum. Yeah. And at first I was laughing, but then, I mean, it made me sad, right? Because you're communicating to students, you're just not smart enough to read, these classic pieces. They are. And so thank you for saying, no, our students are able, and we raise the bar, but we also provide the teachers with the materials, right, to make them successful.
Well, I can tell you, I've seen it with my own eyes in the classroom. When you increase the rigor, kids respond.
Yeah.
They're more engaged, behavior's better. You see a team environment where kids work together. You have kids of all abilities in that room. It takes the stigma away. And you see one student helping another. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I saw no, rolling of the eyes or snickering. It was really this team of students and this great teacher that were really trying to get everybody on the same page and pulling for each other. I don't want to, I mean, that's, I don't know, maybe that, but I literally saw that. And teachers will tell you, and the other thing it does is teachers are like, I feel like I'm having success with my students. They're doing better. Outcomes are better. I want to teach again next year.
Yes.
Time where we have fewer and fewer professionals coming into the profession and they don't stay as long. We need, in any profession, you need seasoned professionals that have been there, done that have had that time to have the experience in that profession to become masters of what they do. And that's, I think great curriculum builds that. So you're getting all these benefits of it where we've gotten off track. Okay. Let's course correct.
Yep.
Let's get it back where it is. Let's listen to parents. Let's listen to teachers. And then let's see what our kids can do. And I saw data yesterday in a classroom where high quality materials that had this real foundational base to it, where the gains being made amongst all demographics, all groups is really a game changer. So we are, I think we have the right, I think we have the right medicine, if you will, if we can just get everybody to take it.
Yep. Yeah. So yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about testing. Obviously, we know here at CLT that assessment is important. That's why we do what we do. We think there's a role for testing. And I know that the reason why a lot of classical schools and traditional schools, liberal arts schools, have opted to do CLT is because, well, the test better reflects the curriculum, right? And oftentimes, I think sometimes the you can change the curriculum, but if the test is tied to standards that you're not following, right, then there's always a little bit of this compromise, this conflict where you feel like, well, we kind of have to teach the test because we want our kids to do well, but it's not really aligned with what we're doing. And so I'm wondering kind of in your estimation, kind of how does testing fit into your vision, public education, but also with some of these changed standards? Does testing have to adjust? Does it have to change? How do you think about that?
I think it does. I mean, I think if if you're presenting a curriculum and your pacing of your lessons is what it is, the scope and sequence, is what it is, and the standards that are being taught, there are, critical thinking is critical thinking. And those questions I think are they usurp all curriculum, right? If you present a question in a way and you've taught the reasoning skills behind it and you've got the basic skills, or, your comprehension level is appropriate, you can do that. But there are some things you just need to know. You just need to know. I call it walking around knowledge, because it's what you build everything else on, right? And so, those things need to be assessed, but you have to make sure that your exam or assessment matches what was taught, right? Or it becomes really a disconnect, and I think it doesn't truly assess where our kids are. So there's really two reasons for that, and I do think that often state assessments, we sort of chase them in a way, because accountability is built off of them and all that. But I also think that it's important that that we know where our kids are.
Yeah.
And we spend a lot of time creating these standards. They're community standards, they're state standards, they're from educators, parents, community members, business, community. It's our elected state board. So, we want to make sure our kids are learning that. And so everything needs to be aligned. But I do think there needs to be flexibility that's based upon the curriculum that kids are being taught.
Yeah.
And so, I think that's an important thing for us to do, because in the end we want educated kids, right? We want them educated, and I think, I'm not to be long-winded here, but I think as you see things in districts embrace a more classical type model, then assessments must reflect it.
Right.
For it to be a meaningful assessment.
Yeah. Brad, I was at a charter school. It was in Colorado, and we had school choice, right? But I always felt like when it came to testing, we were so beholden to the Common Core standards, which we intentionally did not follow. But most of the tests that were out there were aligned with Common Core, and so we're telling our families, well, you're sending your kids here for these reasons, and we teach this. But then, really, the one thing that shows that we're successful in a way, right, that we had to use for validation that we do well, is aligned with things that we really don't follow, that might even be, maybe ideologically not aligned. And so I always felt that tension myself, and it's easier to fix kind of in the private sector, right? Because a lot of legislation, right, is public schools have certain testing mandates, right? Private schools often do not. So I'm wondering, if Texas were to move more in a direction where they, maybe implement more of the classic pieces, the logic pieces, having districts or schools, maybe even potentially the choice to have a nationally normed assessment that better reflects that. I'm wondering how that would work.
Well, I think that as we move to a what I call every tool in the toolbox for parents, what I think is I think those that educate our kids, and parents, students, and then at some point, if it is state dollars involved, we need to have oversight of how they're doing.
Yeah.
But it needs to reflect the way they're being taught. And we can agree that the skills that they're acquiring are valuable, right? And as you look at outcomes, and if you can follow, it'd be interesting to see, what is and I know it's complicated, and I'm certainly not an assessment expert or a social scientist, but it'd be interesting to see sort of the end outcomes of students taught in a classical setting versus a more traditional curriculum, and follow it. I know in my district we have a it's called Providence Academy, and it's a classically based program, and some of it's at home, and some of it's they meet, I think, 2 or 3 days a week. It's very unique. It's very innovative.
Yeah.
And I do know, I know some of the kids that attended there, and they're the foundations of what they've learned. It's just impressive.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The discussions that I've had, and I'm there as a veterinarian, but they also know I'm a politician, and they'll get in a back and forth and want to debate and reason things and ask great questions. And so at some point, I think it also warrants, what really is the best model? Lots of tools in the toolbox, but it is okay to say, you know what, this is better than that.
Yep.
To produce an outcome that gives that child the best opportunity for themselves, but also for our country, and this world.
Yeah.
We can get real deep real quick, but that's fair enough to talk about.
I'll rise. right? I mean, it is. I think you're absolutely right. I
Yeah.
think you're right, and I do, especially
Look, look,
in the great state of Texas.
look on college campuses over the last few months, and tell me how much critical thinking's going on in some of that.
Yep, yep.
And again, I mean, so
It was a
that's
warning sign. Yeah,
it is, and so let's recognize that and understand that education's a journey and it starts at home the minute they're born. And we know that there's a space there that's going to be for moms and dads and guardians and hopefully, and I want every child from the moment they're born to receive everything they need, because that little brain is so receptive, and I oversimplify it, but you just want good things to be in there.
yeah,
Too many kids have bad things put in there, but there's all this capability.
yeah.
What do we do to make that happen and then build that? And I have a 4-year-old grandson, and I'm so proud of my daughter and son-in-law of the environment that they've been able to provide for him and how inquisitive he is and his knowledge and his knowledge base and his vocabulary that's growing. Just it's because they do things with him.
Yeah.
He goes to a good little preschool that's very fundamental, very classic base, really. And he's asking these questions at a young age, and that's a great building block. But how do we scale that? And how do we get agreement that that's what we need to do?
Right.
Educate and let kids decide. Don't have the end in mind. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I know we talked
Yeah.
a little bit before we started recording on, there's some things that you can't, that a bill won't solve, right?
Yeah.
And that's,
Yeah.
having two parents that are involved and that,
That's and
read with the kids and, that,
yeah.
that we can't change through a bill, but we can still culturally, right?
Yeah.
You know,
But you know what? I'll tell you what. When you engage parents and let them know they can be involved, it's a whole different story.
yeah.
You know.
Amen, brother.
So anyway,
Amen.
but that.
Well, I got just a couple more questions. This has been so delightful so far. I do want to talk ESA for our audience. The eyes of America are in Texas right now when it comes to school choice. ESAs are education savings accounts, and many of our listeners have probably heard Arizona, Florida probably had the most kind of sweeping school choice legislation. I know everything is bigger in Texas, so when Texas does it, I'm assuming that they're going to do it a little bit bigger, but I don't know. But you're the right person to talk to.
Yeah.
You authored an ESA bill last year. Can you tell us why you're a supporter of the topic of educational choice and what you hope to accomplish through those ESAs?
What I tell people, because my background, if we talked about at the beginning, and very public school oriented, school
Yeah.
board member, all that. But I am not a professional educator, but I am a parent and a grandparent, and I do know how challenging it is to raise kids and for them to get the education they need. And there's never been a more important time for parents to have every tool in the toolbox. And so when you can do that and give those options to parents, and especially to parents that may not have the options that my kids had. My kids' options were all public school based, by the way, but in an area where there were all kinds of opportunities, and we had the flexibility to, based on certain rules, to get them there at a certain time and pick them up, and all the things required. It's not always the case. And so, I just, I've always, as a public school board member, I never feared school choice. You'd mention it and people would recoil like, if we don't have if government's not compelling attendance, no one will show up. Well, that's not true. The vast majority of kids are going to go to public schools because our public schools most are wonderful. They offer all this, these different opportunities and this social environment, and then there's the extracurricular and all these other things, and they're provided in the private setting as well. But public schools in Texas, it's a big darn deal.
Yeah.
Rural Texas, it is the hub of the community. So, I just don't see the threat, and I'm not sure why there's so much pushback. I think a lot of it is because what school choice really is often not defined. And it's a political issue that folks have kind of tried to use as a wedge to say you either support public schools or you don't. What side are you on? I tell everybody it's not an either or decision. You can support both. I'm about kids learning and being successful. And that is it. That is it. The rest of it, I'm really you know, but I do know what it takes to get there. I mean, I think school choice is one of it. I think pay your teachers more is one of it. I think having great curriculum is one of it. I think an assessment system that's meaningful and accountability system that's meaningful is one of it. I mean, that's part of what we have to do to have this great system. And I think also the school choice discussion is, we are a much more customized society. We buy things differently. We ask more questions. We have more options. We have more choices than ever. And it's time that we would have that in our in our school systems as well, to understand, to give our parents one more tool in the toolbox, because it's their children.
Yeah.
And it is.
Amen. How do you view the prospects of for school choice in Texas and upcoming legislative session? Feel confident?
Yeah, I do. I think, like anything else, what keeps me up at night is crafting a bill and then and passing it, and then also the implementation. Because when you have kids, when you have the ability to really help children, you need to make sure you implement it properly. And it's a big change in Texas.
Mhm.
And we're a big state, and there's a lot of diversity, and we have school districts from 8 kids up to 180,000. So how do you scale that? What's the proper rate of growth? Right now, I think there's 100,000 open private school seats in Texas, across the whole state. 100,000 is it.
Wow.
So, how many? What demand will there be? How do you prioritize who gets it when you have limited resources? And then how do you evaluate it to make sure student outcomes and student growth is occurring, so that policymakers can then make the investments they need to make going forward? But I do think it has a great chance of passing, and then we'll have a tight bill that's, what I mean by tight is one that we run all the traps. We have the ability to implement it well, and we have everything in place to make sure we have a successful program to help kids and families.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thanks for sharing. Well, Brad, we have one more question, which is my absolute favorite. We ask every single guest. It's always the
Okay.
hardest one to answer, I think. Is there one book or one text that you can point to that has had just a great impact on your life? What would it be and why?
Oh my gosh. Oh man, there's so many. I guess maybe some of the James Harriet stuff. As a veterinarian, I grew up as I never wanted to do anything but be a veterinarian. And
Interesting.
it's I literally, my mom cut my sister and I off at 10 dogs that we had rescued one time, and we had cows and horses and all that. And so that series is something that has always been meaningful to me, because it was aspirational. You know what I mean? And it was just so aspirational. Man, I had so many great teachers. I know I'm leaving a lot out, but that one, it's just what I am. I
Yeah.
do the politics stuff, but I'm a veterinarian. I love going to work every day when I get a chance to go there, and I love the
Right.
people involved in it, and that's just what I do.
Yeah. When we did the prep call with your team, Vanessa said, I would bet money that Brad is going to choose bad therapy. I think Abigail Shrier.
Yeah,
And you didn't mention it, so
that's so contemporary. I was thinking more like what influenced me.
right, totally.
Abigail, that Bad Therapy book is just amazing, and just so thought provoking, and
Right.
so honest. I think what bothers me now sometimes is we don't get the opportunity, to kind of challenge the status quo.
Yeah.
I think that changed Tuesday
Yep.
after the election.
Right.
I think and you need to do that. I mean,
Yeah.
if we can't look at things the way if we look at the mental health state of our kids, and then, I just hear it all the time. Well, it's a mental health problem. It's a mental health problem.
Yep.
I've always said, and I don't mean this flippantly, but if everything's a mental health problem, then nothing is, right?
Nothing.
You
That's good.
really need to parse out what really is that and provide those resources, because if not, you'll never have the resources to cover it, right?
Yeah.
It's too broad. So when you do that, but there are some really good thoughts in that book that really made me think as a parent, wow, I did some soul searching.
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
grandparent, some things I'd do different, I
Right.
mean, so anyway, yeah, meaningful.
You're speaking my language. I mean, CLT exists to, in a way, to pick a fight, right, with kind of the progressive
Yeah.
testing establishment, and we
Yeah.
watch a lot of Braveheart, and as long as you're picking a fight for the right reason, right, because it's
Yeah.
for the children, right.
Yeah.
I think ultimately then it's okay to challenge the status quo a little bit. So, uh, Brad Buckley, thank you so much for
Sure.
joining us today. This has been absolutely incredible. Brad is currently serving his third term in the Texas House of Representatives, and we really appreciate you and all the work that you do. Good luck in session here soon, and hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving and Christmas.